that a little bit more later. And the third problem is what everybody knows as cold back. And this is in decreasing order of severity. Obviously, the fracture is the most severe, spondylosis next most severe, and the least severe, though still a problem, is what's called cold back. I like the German word for cold back, Sattelschwang. It really makes it sound like a very nasty thing to have a Sattelschwang, but the Germans have a real propensity to do that sort of thing. So, how do these things occur? They are essentially a continuum, that what goes wrong is somewhat wrong with the cold back, somewhat more wrong when we get to spondylosis, and worst of all, when we get to the actual fracture. Now back to the board. In the normal action, as we've already talked about, when these muscles contract, lifting the back up, the back tends to bend into that sort of a shape, ventrally concave shape. If, however, only the longissimus dorsi contracts, or it contracts before, not synchronously with the spinalis dorsi, the back will bend in that direction. If just the spinalis dorsi contracts, or contracts out of phase, out of synchronization with the longissimus dorsi, then the back will tend to bend that way. Now, when we examine fractures of this thoracic vertebra, what we see is a fracture configuration which occurs because of this kind of bending, which is an abnormal bending as compared to this type of bending. That gave us the clue for spondylosis deformans, where the same sort of bending, abnormal bending occurs, but it is not as severe as a fracture. Rather, it's just enough to tear ligaments on the underside of the vertebral bodies so that they are torn loose from the bone. Tearing something loose from a bone is painful. And this is why the cold-backed horse doesn't want to be saddled, doesn't want to be ridden. Will probably try to stick its head in its rear end or its rear end in its head, anything in the world to try to keep you from putting that saddle on and tightening up the girth, because it hurts. Any movement there at this torn area will hurt. Over a period of time, given time and appropriate handling, that will heal by forming new bone, bridging across from one vertebra to another. If we just simply put two vertebral bodies like this, the ligaments here, it's torn loose, and then in healing, new bone piles up and eventually fuses across so that these two vertebrae no longer move relative to each other, and when that happens, there is no more pain. So most cold back horses will eventually become sound again if you are patient and wait for them. Then we come to Sattelschwang, the cold back itself, the lesser degree of all of this. And we don't have lesions to look at. We don't have fractures or a spondylosis that we can look at because these horses don't come to postmortem. But knowing that out of phase contractions of these two muscles cause a fracture, a little bit lesser out of phase called spondylosis, we then postulate that cold back will be the result of out of phase contraction of these muscles of the back. The story I have to tell really to illustrate this is of the horse been trained by a professional trainer and is sold to someone for their, we'll say, teenage boy or girl to ride. After a week or so, they come back to the trainer and say, this horse is terrible, we can't get a saddle on him, he's absolutely useless. The back is so bad, he just won't let us do anything. So the trainer says, all right, I'll take the horse back and see if I can figure out what the problem is. So he takes the horse back, and a week or two goes by, and he calls him up and says, the horse is perfectly fine, come back and get him. There's no problem, there's no cold back or anything there. So they take the horse back again, put the teenager back on, and you guessed it, within a week, by God, it's doing it again. Sore, painful again. What's happening? The person, the young, inexperienced rider, is not riding in a balanced seat, not riding where they should be on the horse. Now, where should an individual be on the horse? The center of gravity of the rider should be over the center of gravity of the horse. If that is the case, the horse then just perceives additional weight, which is distributed on his back just exactly like his own weight is distributed, considered to be concentrated at the center of gravity. When the rider is riding back off of that, the horse now perceives two centers of gravity. His own he has to deal with, and this extra one, which is in another place where it shouldn't be. To illustrate that for us, or to test that hypothesis, we ran a horse, or walked and ran a horse on the treadmill with a marker on the back while we filmed it. And we put 40 pounds of sand in saddlebags and put them right on the horse where they should be for normal riding over the center of gravity. And recorded the movement of the back on the video. So there's time, and this is the displacement or the movement of that spot on the horse's back. With the saddlebags in the right place, balanced seat, what we saw was a nice uniform sine wave sort of movement like that. Completed that run, then we moved the saddlebags, same saddlebag, same load, move it back about 6 inches behind where it should be, and recorded again. And what we saw on that second recording was something that looked like this. Very ragged and jagged and irregular. This tells us, by using some rather fancy mathematical techniques, tells us that these two, here the two muscles, the spinalis and the longissimus, were contracting together. So we have a smooth wave. Here they are not contracting in phase with each other, so we have this jagged, irregular appearance. That obviously jagged, irregular indicates what the muscles are doing, jerking an irregular motion, and thus the pain thus does not do well with the green, unbalanced seat rider. So what about this center of gravity? Just where is it? How do you determine where it is? Good riders know where it is. They get on a horse and start to move, and they shift themselves until they feel themselves in nice synchronization with the horse. The young, inexperienced rider, however, will have a little more difficulty. Let's just look at the concept of center of gravity. It's basic to any kind of mechanical analysis of any system, including a horse. It is a point in a physical body at which we consider the entire mass of the horse to be concentrated. Now, I know that's rather an abstract concept, so let's make it a little better, a little simpler. If I have, just say that's the horse, and I want to find the center of gravity of that horse, of that. So how do I go about doing that? Well, I can hang a string there, fastened up here, and of course this will fall down. So it's not at the center of gravity. If I put it right in the dead center, and you could think of this as a seesaw with the fulcrum here, when it's exactly balanced, that's the center of gravity. That's why when the horsemen say a balanced seat, they're using the term very, very well indeed, because it's an equilibrium point. It's that point in the body which gives equilibrium. Now, if you want to find this out on your own horse, take a photograph, a confirmation photograph from the side, cut out that photograph, paste it on some cardboard, and take a piece of string like this with a little bit of gum on it, and stick it on the top, and stick it at different places until you get that little horse figure exactly balanced. Then you draw a line on it, and that's where the center of gravity of that horse lies. Way back when, the German anatomists determined the center of gravity on whole horses. They embalmed a horse and hung him up from the ceiling until they found exactly where that center of gravity, line of action of the center of gravity was. I won't suggest you do that with your horse, But the little cardboard thing is a very good model and will show you exactly where it is. Okay, that really covers pretty much what we have to say about damage to the back. You'll hear many other things. You'll hear about many other things. You'll hear about impinging dorsal spines right here in the withers. That is, if I move over to the skeleton, these spines, dorsal spines of thoracic vertebra, overriding each other or impinging upon each other. Much is made of this. Sometimes they even go in surgically and cut them off, which is nice for the surgeons but not so great for the horse. The reason why these spines override in that fashion is because the horse is developing spondylosis deformans. The back is bending into this kind of a position, and the spines, of course, are going to override. So the spines are nothing more, overriding of the spines is nothing more than an indication that something is going wrong. And what is going wrong is what you can't see, even with, except with very powerful X-ray machines, that spondylosis deformans is starting to develop. Okay, given that we have these three conditions, what does one do about them? How can you prevent them or treat them? First of all, fractures you don't treat. Forget it. The horse is gone. A broken thoracic vertebra that's it. The spinal cord is invariably either cut in half or mashed badly, so the horse is down and is never going to get up again. In the case of spondylosis deformans and cold back, both of these conditions are basically self-curing. In the case of the cold back, the first thing you do, of course, is to be sure that the individuals who are riding the horse know how to ride and know where on the horse to ride. There'll have to be a period of rest before you go back to riding, because there's a nice gradation from cold back into spondylosis. It's hurting, and then it's going to hurt a little bit more when a little tearing starts. So there's going to have to be a period of rest before you start going back. Then you ride properly. You don't put 200-pound riders on ponies, on little horses. A horse should carry no more than 20% of his own body weight. That is, a 1,000-pound horse can carry that 200-pound rider up to a point, but much better a bigger horse and a lighter rider. That 20% is not hard science. That's experience of cavalry people over many, many years. That 20% is the maximum weight that a horse should be expected to carry. How long does it take for them to get over these problems? Varies from horse to horse, and there's no way of really predicting in a general way how long it's going to take. You just have to watch the horse, exercise. He tells you he hurts, stop. Wait a little while, come back, try again. It still hurts, wait a little while, come back again, and oh, it doesn't hurt so much. I'm going a long ways for maybe a half an hour. Now it's starting to hurt, better stop now. So you have to judge how long it's going to take by what the animal tells you about whether he's hurting. Things like butazolidine and so on are of very, very little use with back problems. It just doesn't seem to work very well with them. And I don't know that we really want to use them particularly anyway, because we want to get that feedback from the horse so he can tell us when he's ready to do something and when he's not ready to do something. Various strategies have been tried to deal with what are thought to be back problems in the horse. I suppose one of the more popular these days is chiropractic. I think maybe chiropractors do some good for people. They're good masseurs. But that they do anything for the horse, I quite frankly say no, they cannot. I defy any of them to come into the post-mortem room with me and with a dead horse back to put any part of that back into the positions that they claim that they're correcting clinically. Many years ago, one of the earliest chiropractors to appear in this area had a very large following for some period of time, until a rather sharp-eyed, and what he would do is go down the horse's back and you'd hear this sound like that. And he'd say, oh yeah, there it is, and he'd manipulate it and it wouldn't be there anymore and the horse would be all cured. Well, a sharp-eyed veterinarian one day happened to got on the other side of the horse and was watching, and this fella had learned to snap his fingers. I can't do it very well. Snapping with the thumb and that finger. So it made a tremendous noise. So he'd go down the back, and when he thought nobody could see it, then he'd go like that, and I found it. Well, that was the end of his practice in central Kentucky, needless to say. I have seen, and I know of no evidence whatsoever that chiropractic is of the slightest use whatsoever in the horse. Acupuncture is also tried. Acupuncture, there's no question, does tend to decrease pain. It's as if you give an injection of Novocaine or something of the sort, but you do it by using acupuncture needles rather than by actually injecting a drug. It induces natural endorphins, morphine-like compounds in the body. So acupuncture might be of some help. I've had no direct experience with it, except having done on myself once, but I have no experience of doing it with horses, so I don't know how much use it might be. One mistake that's made frequently in people examining backs is to run their hands or their fingers down the back and see a reaction which they say, aha, look, that horse is showing some pain. Now I'm just going to shift around on the other side of the horse for a minute. Older horses tend not to show this reaction as much as younger ones, but I think she's done very nicely for us in showing that nice serpentine movement of the back tending to bow down as I drag the pen along. And it's just a blunt pen, it's not a sharp pen. And that's called a spina prominens reflex. It's a perfectly normal reflex in the horse. Every horse will show it to one degree or another, except with older stallions. I don't know why this is, but older stallions won't show it. Very seldom can you elicit it in them. They just try to turn their head around and look at you and say, you do it again, I'm going to bite you. But they will not bend down the way most horses do. It is not an indication of a bad back. Quite the contrary, it's an indication of a perfectly normal back. What the horse will do if they have spondylosis deformans, painful spondylosis deformans, for example, is that they will try to prevent that reflex. They will try to override it. The first time you do it, you'll get it. The second time you try to do it, the horse's brain says that's going to hurt if that moves again like that. So they fix the muscles, splint the muscles before you get there so that the movement does not occur or is greatly reduced. Sometimes, not often, but sometimes you can put your hand over this area, the saddle area, where spondylosis occurs, and start running your pen down, and you can feel the muscle contract under your fingers before you get there. In other words, the animal is trying to protect itself from the movement because the movement hurts. This is just what we do with a painful joint. You know, we try to keep it from moving, to keep it from hurting. So the spina prominens reflex is a perfectly normal reflex, of variable extent from horse to horse, somewhat variable even from day to day in the same horse, but always present, as I said, except in the older stallion. So it's not an example of a bad back. Okay, now I think we've about finished what we can do with the back, and we'll move on to talk a little bit about the rear leg. We'll start with the skeleton. The first problem, we'll start at the top and work our way down. The first area in which we encounter problems is the sacroiliac joint. The sacroiliac joint is between the sacrum here and the ilium. It's down in here deep where we really cannot see it, about in the position of that bolt that's present here holding the skeleton together. So it's very deeply located down in there, but it does develop arthrosis, damage to that articulation. It damages it to a certain extent in virtually all horses as they get older and older. So the problem is if they damage it when they're still young and of working age. We tend to see sacroiliac arthrosis much more commonly in horses that work either at speed or for long distances at the walk or the trot. Now let me move over here to just continue with that thought. As a horse gallops, both hind legs move forward together and backwards together. Kind of a bump and grind sort of movement like that. They're not perfectly in phase with each other, about 45 degrees out of phase, but they're both moving in the same direction, forward and back. That means that most of the motion that's occurring as far as the back of the sacroiliac is concerned is simply a motion like this. That motion is mostly at the lumbosacral joint and very little at the sacroiliac joints. A horse at the walk or the trot over periods of time, or any horse at the walk or the trot at all, never have the two hind legs moving together. They're always 180 degrees out of phase with each other. So with me, as I walk or trot, which I can't really do, all I can do is walk or run, but when I'm doing it, I'm kind of doing this. So I'm kind of getting a back and forth motion like so. That back and forth motion causes shearing forces to be generated at the sacroiliac joints, and this causes the damage to the sacroiliac joints. The study which really convinced us, I think, of this particular